Hello, and welcome to the second episode of the second season of the Story Coaching Podcast. I am your host, Charlotte McFarlane from The Writable, and today we are going to talk about planning a new novel. I really wanted to take you through step by step how it is that I plan and plot and move on to writing my stories, my books, because I think that this is a process that seems like it would be very intuitive, that seems like it's very obvious, but until you actually sit down and figure out your process of how you assemble all of your ideas and get them ready to end up on the page, it's just sort of this nebulous thing that you think you know how it's going to work, but it's not so simple. It's not so straightforward. And storytelling really is a process. It unfortunately, we can't just sit down and spew out 80,000 words of a story, certainly not a coherent story. Yes, there are people that like to, as they say, pants or plot garden, where really, that is the method, to sit down at the keyboard and to just start writing and to see what happens. Certainly there are people that do that. I think that those people, and I used to be one of those people for sure. I think really what you're doing when you're just sort of pantsing it is you're going through the whole discovery process, honestly, in what I think is a very difficult way. But you're going through this discovery process by the act of writing. And I really do think that that's the hardest way to do it. I think it's the slowest way to do it, because you're either going to spend a lot of time, you probably regardless are going to spend a lot of time trying to figure out what happens next. And then you're going to end up spending a lot of time editing and turning it into a coherent story. And, the emphasis on coherent, every book really does require a coherent story. I've read books that just sort of jump from here to here to here, and they're not very satisfying as the reader. They're just kind of glitzy and sporadic, and part of what makes them interesting is you have literally no idea what's going to happen next. But again, very, very frustrating to read because what's happening is not related. And just isn't coherent. It just doesn't fit all together. And so, like I said, I used to do this process, but I wound up, I would say a lot of those books are somewhere on a hard drive, never to be seen again. But the one book that I did eventually turn into a published novel, it took like a year and a half to write or something, and then took probably that long to edit it, to turn it into something. It was like I wrote it and then I just rewrote the whole thing from scratch after I'd had time to kind of process it. And now what I do is a very different process. And I did want to share that with you today because I think that it's important to at least know that there are options out there to help us write more quickly, more coherently, to write better fiction in an easier way, honestly, in an easier way, and in a way that, speed can be important because you want to take advantage of that excitement. You don't want to be bogged down by years of working on the same book, because you may lose your enthusiasm for it and never actually finish. And so again, let me share my process with you. Everyone's process is going to be different. You may decide that you really like this and want to try it. You may decide you want to try elements of it. You may decide that you're really not interested in this type of process, but let me share it with you and keep an open mind of what this type of process can do for you. And again, I want to get kind of specific about some of the nitty gritty stuff, because it can seem kind of nebulous to go from an idea to a full-blown story where everything, sort of fits together, and you've got all of those side plots and, the characters and the world and everything, again, is coherent. All right, so the first step really is daydreaming. It's finding that inspiration. It's latching on to a story idea that you are excited enough about in order to actually do the hard work of turning it into a book. And someone asked me the other day, and they said, well, how long do you do this for? And truthfully, I get ideas all the time, right? So I have all of these like crazy story ideas, and normally I will just write them down. I keep a little notes folder in my phone and just jot them down. I had one the other day that was like Firefly meets Dragon Racers, and then like a one line, a group of smugglers head around, are going around the universe, also racing their giant like dog. So was, I think, the idea that came to me, and in my head it sounded a lot better than it sounds now. But just wrote it down, like a quick, sort of idea of kind of what it might be like, and then kind of a rough idea of what it would actually be about. And I write it down, and I have at this point, no serious plans to go and write that and turn it into a book or a series. But it was an idea. It came to me. I like to honor those ideas by at least writing them down, and might spend a few minutes thinking about it. And truthfully, the work in progress that I have right now, the books that I'm going through and actually doing some plotting right now, I've had the idea in my head for about 2 years. And I knew it was a book I wanted to write for a few reasons, but primarily because it's an idea that I've had for a couple of years that I keep going back to and I keep thinking about. And so over those 2 years, without really putting any conscious effort into it, and I mean, 2 years is what this one has been. I've done others that have been a month. I've done others that have been multiple years. It just whatever kind of fits at the right time. But over that time between the first idea to when I actually decided to write it, I'd thought about it a handful of times. Nothing seriously, nothing really consciously, but I had a vision of what it was going to be like. I had enough for me to say, hey, I kind of know pretty well in my head what this story is like. I know generally what the characters are like. I have an idea of what different characters I need, and an idea of what this world is going to look like. And so the book I'm working on right now is a time travel story about basically it's about time agents. So if you can imagine, like Star Trek type, organization that is focused entirely on time, and keeping the timeline straight. And there's some nice twists in there about why is the timeline need to be kept straight at all. But, I knew off the bat, like, okay, well, it's going to be, they're all going to live on a space station. They're all going to be people that have been displaced from their timelines. And I know that, the main character is going to be a field operative who actually goes into the past and fixes things, whatever needs to be fixed. And she's going to have a team. I knew that there was going to be a team. At some point, I knew it was going to be 3 people. I knew that she was going to, again, be someone displaced from time, and that her, the person watching over her was going to be the general, kind of the leader of the group, and he had obtained her on a mission that he went on. So I knew these things. That's not really a whole story. I knew that she was going to displace herself from time accidentally, and I kind of knew that that's what it was going to be about, but I didn't really know anything more than that. but again, so really, I mean, the first step is to daydream, and you get some ideas of what the story's going to be like, and you get enough ideas at some point that everything kind of lines up, and you say, okay, I want to actually look at this. I'm interested enough in it that I keep thinking about it. Again, I have some ideas, and the timing is right. You know, it's the right time for a story of this kind of mood or feel or genre for me. It's a good time for me to write a story of this length, and then you decide, yeah, I'm going to do it. But again, that first step really is just daydream. Is just spending some time with the story, and I always like to remind myself. I'd heard years ago, and so long ago that I can't even recall where or when, but someone had said, you know, writing is, and I'm obviously paraphrasing because I don't remember the specifics, but the point was, you know, writing is one of the only jobs where staring into space actually counts as working. And it's so true. I mean, as writers, it is work when we just sit there and daydream. So I would encourage you to do that, and really build your creativity muscles that way as much as possible, and just explore stories. And some you're going to like, and some you're going to decide you don't want to explore anymore, and that's normal, and that's perfect. So when I decide that I've daydreamed enough on a story and I like it, I'm going to go through and really what I want to do is identify my theme. And your theme is actually the belief shift that your main character goes through. And this stuff is a little bit conceptual. And I go through it in the story planning guide, and you can download that for free. I'll put a link in the show notes about how to identify your book's theme, which is really the belief shift that your main character is having. And so I start to ask, like, what happens? So in my time travel book, you know, this girl, she displaces herself from time, and the whole book is really about her trying to figure out what went wrong and how to go back and fix it so that she gets back into, you know, the right timeline. So I knew that, you know, what happens at the end of the book is that she ends up figuring out how to get back to her her group, her actual people that she knows. And so from there, there's some questions you can ask to get down into your book's theme, and really it relies on, you know, what's kind of the feeling that you want to leave your reader with. And for me, I wanted this sense of hope for sure, but this kind of, you know, sort of bittersweet ending. This kind of, you know, we're losing some things in order to gain other things. And the book's theme, I can't remember how I actually identified it, but it really came down to being present in the moment, being happy with what you have, and being able to let things go. And being able to let go of your ideals of a perfect situation. And so that's really the book's theme, or the series' theme, is at the end of reading it, I want people to have spent some time thinking about that question, or thinking about that idea. And so then I go down and I say, okay, well then what's the belief shift that the character is going to have? Because the belief shift that your character experiences is the same as the belief shift that your readers are going to experience. So to identify a belief shift, I know where I want them to end. I want them to end thinking about the theme, thinking about this idea that we can let go of our perfect idea, let go of trying to make something happen, and instead just be happy and present in the moment, and happy and present with the things that we've experienced, even when they go away. So I know that that's the end, but in the beginning, it's going to be something different. It's going to be something opposite. And so my character is very much, in the beginning, she's very controlling. She wants to basically create this perfect timeline, where everything that she experiences, everything that she does is perfect. She wants to be perfect, and she has her reasons for wanting that. And through the book, I know that that's going to shift. So step 2, really when I start thinking I'm going to write this book or this series, I do tend to write in series. When I say I'm going to write this, I start saying what happens. Okay, then what is the theme and what is the belief shift that this character has to go through? And I'm going to take that belief shift and I'm actually going to use that as the basis of my story structure. And story structure is something that I talk about briefly in the story planning guide, but then really we go into that in depth in the Right Now program. So this belief shift fits into the story structure. And in the universal story structure, there are 7 different turning points. There's 7 points where things get kind of tense and something changes. And that leads into the next sort of set of actions. And so these are turning points, both in plot, both in what's happening externally, but also in what is happening internally with the character. And so I identify 7 baby steps between where the character starts and where the character ends. And yes, 7 is the number, but certainly some other universe or some other story structure, different structures, different ideas will put forth. You can do 5, you can do 8, you can do whatever. I think 7 is kind of what I identified, and that's what I use. But yes, some people certainly go through 5. Some people really identify 3 big ones. But you want to do 7-ish. You want to do a series of turning points, of baby steps where the belief is micro shifting from, controlling, I have to be perfect, to, okay, well, maybe sometimes I need help with something, to things don't need to be quite perfect. Sometimes we can go with things that are good enough, to I have to leave, or I have to know when it's time for me to step back because I'm not the best person for the job, to I have to let go of my idea of a perfect reality. Whatever those steps are for your character and the theme or the belief shift that you're exploring. So you create those 7, and then you have really an idea, and you create the belief shift, the micro shift, and you have an idea of what sort of event is going to lead to that change. And so then you have kind of this really skeleton story structure. And then I shift a little bit and I go into planning. And planning is really touched in depth in the story planning guide. So again, I'll put that link in the comments for you guys. But planning really is looking at your different elements of your story. So characters, all of their wants, needs, motivations, their quirks, their backstory, everything about the characters that you have involved. And your world building, so the rules, the physical laws. For me, how does time travel work? What are the rules? How do you avoid paradoxes? That sort of thing. But also, what are the challenges? What are the customs? What are, who are the leaders? Who are the popular figures? What kind of pop culture references might these people be making, or what is important to them? How do they describe things and think about things? As well as your conflict. So, what are the internal and the external goals? What are the obstacles? What's getting in the way? And you use those 3 things to just keep building. It's kind of the cyclical process of, I know a little bit about my character. I know that that's been informed by the world that they grow up in, and that's also been informed by some of the conflict that exists. So something in the world creates a conflict that creates some other, character forming experience that tells me then something more about my character. And you just go through this cyclical kind of cycle up and down of, who are the characters? How do they live? Really trying to piece together all of the elements of your story so that you have a very good idea of, who, what, where, when, why. before you even start writing. And then from there, once I know more about the characters, the world, the conflict, I start expanding the events in my plot outline, in my story structure. So I have 7 turning points. Now I know more about the conditions of the world. I know more about the personalities of the characters and what they're going to do and why they're going to do different things. And I really just use that to fill in how do they get from A to B. So if I'm going to have one event and I know that my next turning point is going to be this event, what is happening in between? And that gets a little bit tricky to tell someone how to do, because every story is going to be different. But we also know in the story structure that different sections are going to focus on different things. For example, the beginning of your book, your character is going to be a certain way, and then you have the setup, which is where we hear a little bit about the conflict that might be coming, like the main story problem. But really what we're doing is we're seeing the character in their day-to-day life with their day-to-day struggles. And then at some point there's going to be the inciting incident where something changes and all of a sudden they don't want to go, but they have to engage with the story conflict. Then there's the build-up phase where they're learning some of the things that they need in order to overcome the story conflict. So there is this structure and different pieces, different things that have to happen at each point of the story in order to keep it together. And really we're just creating this idea, or really we're creating steps. How does everything move from point A to point B? And then we expand those steps even further. And so I kind of do 3 passes on my plot. And so the first one is looking at the character and their belief shift and identifying, again for me, 7 events to get them from the first belief to the final belief. So 7 events. And then I start thinking physically, how are we moving between each of these events? And so it's kind of like, well, here the 7 events become like your main, like big events. And then you're thinking the steps, how do they move in between? And after that, I actually go through and I start really breaking down each of those steps. Each of those steps is going to be a scene. I start breaking those down into beats, and what they call beats, which is really just one action, one chunk of dialogue. So, I might start with, character goes to the mall. This is completely made up. Character goes to the mall, and so that's going to be like my whole scene. But the step by step might be, character's mom drops her off and reminds her not to spend too much money, and then the next beat is she walks away and is like, oh, whatever, mom. And the next beat is she meets up with her friends. The next beat is they walk in through the doors, in through a store, whatever it's going to look like. So I'm breaking it down into very, very fine detail, all of the steps that are going to be happening. And that's really effective because basically what I'm doing is I'm figuring out all of the complicated stuff, how they move from A to B. I'm figuring that all out without the pressure of writing. And it's really, you can go much faster when you're just making notes. And then you also have this beautiful thing that happens where, you can be working on, your scene, halfway through your book, and you realize you want something to happen, and you can go back and you can add in the foreshadowing at this stage. You can say, like, oh, well, they need a credit card issue, and you go back in and you put that earlier in your setup or your build up, some hints that's going to show up later. So this really beautiful thing happens where you can bounce back and forth, and because you're just making like really short point form notes about all of these micro steps, you can go really fast through your entire book. And then the really nice thing about doing this is when you're done, what I do is I run through the entire story like I'm watching a movie. I close my eyes and I imagine it step by step. If I was watching this story play out on the screen, what are all of the things that I would be seeing? And I can add and I can tweak and I can adjust, but it allows me to really look for any plot holes, any places where the pacing has gone a little bit off. I can see the whole story, and we all have these intuitive understandings of how stories work. I mean, we know when a movie is good or when a movie is bad. And so I'm watching it as a movie, which doesn't take as much time as reading an entire book, and certainly not as much time as writing an entire book. So I'm watching it as a movie, and I'm checking off, does this work? Does this make sense? And I'm adding and I'm tweaking. And when I'm happy with that mental movie, when I can play through and say like, yeah, this totally works, then it's time to get writing. And when I sit down to write, I have a really good visual of all of the pieces that are involved. I have a good idea of what all of those scenes look like. And so the writing becomes very quick and becomes very easy. And you're able to actually add in much better, in my opinion. You're able to do things like description much better. You're able to add in little foreshadowing tweaks. You're able to pick your right adverbs and adjectives if you're using them. You're able to do that higher level writing stuff as you're writing your first draft, because you're not so busy trying to figure out what's going to happen. You already know what's going to happen. Now the writing part is really just what's the best way to share it. So start to finish, that is how I plan and plot a novel. Again, you can get, you can access for free a lot of the questions that I ask about character, about world, about conflicts, and how to figure out your theme. You can find that all in the story planning guide. It's available at thewritable.com/story planning guide. Or you can, like I said, the link is going to be in the description here, or you can just go to thewritable.com/free resources and you'll find your way to it. It really is a useful tool that's put together to help you plan all of the elements that you need, and then takes you through a good overview of the universal story structure. So that structure that you can plot, that you can drop basically all of your events into, in order to have a story come out that's paced usually pretty well, to keep a reader excited and interested. All right, so that is enough for this episode today. Thank you for listening. I really do just hope that helps you, and certainly give it a try. I will at some point in the near future put together an actual video of me doing that, so that you can maybe see some of that, some of the plotting, actual breakdown, how I'm expanding things out, because that can be a little bit conceptual, but really what you want to do is get to a point where you can see exactly what's happening in each scene, so that when you start to write, you're not wondering what's going to happen. You already know how everything works together. All right, thanks so much. Happy writing, guys, and I will see you next week with our next episode.